which was their Saturday. But these chief leaders of the Jewish religion get up in the morning and they go and they see Pilate. And they say, hey, Jesus is dead. He's in the grave. We all know that. But what we're concerned about is that his followers are going to come along and steal his body. His body was just put in there the night before. And if he does that, if they do that, if they steal his body, we're never going to be able to quash these rumors that he came back to life. Because remember when he was alive, see, the Jewish leaders are telling Pilate this. Remember, he would say, after 3 days, I will rise again. They remembered what Jesus said. Now, what's interesting to me is at the same time all of this is going on, the disciples and the women that followed Jesus, they're all where? Hiding. They're scared. They're grieving. They're hiding. They're out of sorts because the person that they followed for all of these years is dead. He's in the grave. Now what? He started this great movement, but we don't know what to do with ourselves. He's dead. What do we do? So the Jewish leaders remembered something that Jesus' own disciples didn't remember. Otherwise, it would have been a little bit like some of you on Black Friday camping out for the new Xbox. You'd have had tents pitched in front of the tombstone. You'd have been waiting with great anticipation for the doors to open. Right? To get that glimpse. But they're not there. They're not there. The Jewish leaders convinced Pilate that if the body's stolen, they're never going to be able to overcome that. So they asked Pilate on the Sabbath to put together a Roman guard to go and camp out at the tomb so nobody steals Jesus' body. And he agrees. Not only does he agree to that, but remember, there's big stones that are rolled over the tombs back there, back in those days. Okay? Tombs were more like caverns. They kind of cut different layers out of the rock, and then they would shut that off with a big boulder that most people couldn't move alone. And so the Roman guard shows up. They take this cord that's kind of this wax cord, like a wax seal, and you guys use that press and seal stuff for the Christmas cookies that you're baking this year for me? Keep them fresh? I don't need a lot of Christmas cookies, but a couple maybe. Okay? A couple. The press and seal stuff, this is kind of this, think about the same thing. Okay, so this rock is over this opening. They use this cord that's kind of got this wax stuff on it, and they shove it in the crack so that if any tampering happens, they'll know. And then they seal it with the governor's ring. Back in those days, they all had rings that they would press into wax that would say, by order of the governor, do not or do this. And that's how they would kind of know that everything was supposed to happen. So the tomb is guarded by Roman soldiers at the Jewish leaders' request. It's sealed by this cord that goes around the outside, just tamper-proof kind of thing. And it's sealed by the governor's stamp. Do not tamper with this. So that's kind of what's going on, okay? All of these countermeasures were going to make it impossible for Jesus' followers to steal Jesus out of the tomb. But they didn't consider an escape, did they? It was all based around not letting anybody in, but they hadn't considered letting anybody out. So let's look at what we've got here in 28. Matthew 28, we're going to be in 1 through 15. Okay, so after the Sabbath, that's Sunday, the first day of the week, at dawn, Sunday's their first day. We didn't start celebrating Sundays as the kind of the religious holy day of the week until after Jesus came out of the tomb. And that's why we changed it. It used to be Saturdays, okay? After the Sabbath, which was Saturday, dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, there was a whole lot of Marys back then, okay, went to look at the tomb. Now, listen, I love that April prayed for us today. Because so oftentimes we look at women as kind of this subclass or something, like you have less of the Holy Spirit in you than a man does. And I disagree. I mean, one of the things that we see over and over again is how Jesus is elevating the call of women and how important women's roles are in the world. They were the last ones to leave the crucifixion. And they're the first ones to arrive at the tomb. Good job, women. Good job. They went to look at the tomb the next day because they hadn't done all of the proper burial stuff because they didn't have time. Because of the Sabbath, they were in a hurry to get home before sunset. That's when Sabbath started on Friday. So they didn't have time to embalm him properly. They were on their way to do that this morning. There was a violent earthquake while they were on their way, and an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and, going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. And Jesus walked out. Is that what it says? No. Why did the angel roll back the stone? So they could see in. Jesus wasn't there anymore. But as long as that stone was in the way, they weren't going to know that. The angel comes down from heaven, rolls the stone away, and says, "Look!" In fact, he might even say that in the next verse. Let's see what it says. Oh, still on the angel's appearance. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow, blinding. The guards were so afraid of him, don't you love this, that they shook and became like dead men. The guards just flat out pass out. I mean, can you imagine you're a Roman guard, you've been trained, these guys knew what they were doing. They're really, really rugged, rough, mean guys. And here they are in the appearance of this angel passing out in front of them. Every time you see an angel appear in the Bible, it scares the crud out of everyone that sees it. Angels typically are mighty warrior beings that are overwhelming to anyone that looks. Every time you see it, they're terrified by that appearance. They became like dead men. The angel says to the women, "Do not be afraid. I know that you are looking for Jesus who," sorry about that, was crucified. I know that you're looking for Jesus who was crucified. I know what you're looking for here, ladies. I know. Next verse. He was crucified. He should still be here. But he is not here. He has risen. Look inside. Just like he said, remember what he said? Come and see the place where he lay. Come and see where he was. But he's not there anymore. And once you see, he says, go quickly and tell the disciples he's risen from the dead and he's going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. And the angel says, now I've told you. So the women hurry away from the tomb, afraid. They're still afraid. Yet, it says, they're filled with joy. Could it be that he's alive? Imagine. All of them are in mourning because they've seen their Savior die. All of them are upset and unsure what to do. They followed this man with all of their hearts for all of the years that he walked around doing ministry. They've had many meals with him. They've seen him perform miracles. They've seen all of these things. They even heard what he said. And they go from grief to joy. He's risen, just as he said. Now go. Go and tell the disciples that he's going into Galilee and he'll meet you there. So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell the disciples. Now imagine that conversation. You guys aren't going to believe what we just... Right? Next verse. On their way to tell the disciples what happens, Jesus meets them. The guy that was dead is now standing before them, and look what happens. He says, "What's up?" You guys laugh, but he probably would have said something like that, because this idea of greetings isn't greetings, earthlings. It's not what that is at all. Okay? The idea of this word greetings means this happy and elated and everything is good with me. It's an expression of, man, life is great. How you doing? What's up? And they see him and they hear this from him. He doesn't look like the guy was dead and he's alive and he's standing before them. What happens? They came to him, probably elated, and this is interesting, guys. This is important for us to see this next section. It seems like something that you could read over pretty quickly, but listen. They clasped his feet and worshipped him. Those of you with young kids, or not so young kids, Maybe those of you that don't have kids at all, maybe one day if you have kids, maybe you've got grandkids. Not, well, you probably wouldn't have grandkids if you didn't have kids. Maybe you've got nieces and nephews. I'm working it through in my mind. I'm sorry. Track with me. Young kids love to grab your ankles, especially when you're trying to leave someplace. Right? They don't want you to go. They love you, most of you. And so what they do is they clasp you, they'll grab, and then you wind up doing that funky walk, you know, where you're trying to walk with this 60-pound lead weight hanging off of it a little bit, like Frankenstein or something. They're hanging on. They don't want you to leave because they love you. The women are doing the same thing. They're saying, Jesus, you're alive. And we love you. But the other thing that's interesting to me is, how do you grab a spirit's ankles? You don't! Because spirits and mythical things like that, they don't have a physical presence, do they? But see, what this teaches us right here is about, remember that package that someday we're going to throw off and we're going to get a whole new one? This is Jesus in his new body. This is Jesus in his new form, and guess what? You can grab onto it. And you can hold onto it. It's got physical presence. It also, we learn in other gospel writers, when he appears and walks through doors and things like that, I mean, there's a little bit of this weird, like, transporting kind of thing that we don't quite fully understand yet. Jesus is alive today in heaven, in a physical body in heaven. So we're not really sure how all of that stuff works, but we know right here that they grabbed onto him. We know in his account with Thomas, who doubted that he was alive again, he said, feel my nail marks in my hands and the spear wound in my side. Feel it. It's there. It's real. He has those scars today for you. There's a physical part of him. He ate and he drank with them before he went back to heaven. He also appeared out of thin air at times through locked doors. But that new body that we get, it's very real, and it's something to look forward to. And so that was what I was going to tell you about. And I did. Let's move on. Let's see. Oh, wait, go back. I don't know if we finished that one. So, Jesus met them. Greetings. What's up? And they came and clasped his feet and worshipped him. By the way, worship isn't just about singing. And I'm struggling with that at times, to be honest with you. Since Kevin left, our last worship leader, it's hard for me to think about doing church on Sunday morning without singing. But worship isn't just about singing. Worship is about giving our time, about giving our treasure, about loving God, about thinking about God, serving him with our bodies. I mean, that's all part of worship. How many of you are going to be here on Christmas Eve? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? Well, you better be here on Christmas Eve. We're still trying to figure that out, because without songs on Christmas Eve, it seems a little bit just strange to me. So we're trying to figure out what we're going to do for Christmas Eve. I told you a couple of weeks ago we were going to have you pick up tickets so we knew how many people were coming, and now I'm telling you I don't know what we're going to do. So don't worry about that. We're still trying to figure it out. If you guys know how to sing Christmas carols, that would be helpful. You don't want me singing Christmas? No, Jacob. See, I told you he was going to get me back. No. They worshipped him. They worshipped him. They threw their lives down before him and said, we love you, and we want to follow you, and we are so overjoyed. Then Jesus says to them, don't be afraid. I mean, again, when you see somebody alive after they died, and you've encountered an angel, and all of this weird stuff's going on, it can be a little bit off-putting, and no wonder they're afraid. But he says, don't be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me. Jesus' message changed. Do you see the difference? The angel said, go and tell the disciples. Jesus shows up in front of them and says, go and tell. His message from this point forward, once he walks out of that tomb, is never the same. Later on, at the end of the Gospel of Matthew, he sends them out. He says, go and share the good news. all over the world to make disciples and baptize people. His message has changed again. So we saw it a couple of times throughout his life. This time, it's pretty simple. Go and tell, go and tell, go and tell. Verse 11. So while the women were on the way, some of the guards went into the city and reported to the chief priests everything that happened. The reason that I like Matthew's account of this experience is because I think it sets us up to see some things without a doubt. The Roman guards had a pretty strict policy on if you fail at your job, you die. They didn't give them a whole lot of leeway. So the fact that some of the guards, not all of them, I have no idea how many guards there were, but some of them decided that the right thing to do here was to go back and tell the chief priests, who actually told their boss to put them there in the beginning, what had happened. So they go back at great peril to their own lives. If you're asleep on the job, you die as a Roman guard. If you're found lying about your job, you die as a Roman guard. If you are found not doing, thank God this isn't the way today, right? Because if your boss said you don't do your job while you're dead, that would be a pretty hard review, wouldn't it? Although some of you bosses might have employees that you might like that. Never mind. Merry Christmas. Wait, little insight into the way that my mind works sometimes, right? It's kind of scary. If you don't do your job, you are in danger of death. So the fact that these guys said, we're going to go back and tell the truth on what happened here, that is a major deal. It put them in great jeopardy. Next slide. When the chief priests had met with the elders and devised a plan, they gave the soldiers a large sum of money, telling them, you're to say his disciples came during the night and stole them away while we were asleep. Listen, you can't make this stuff up. You can't make this stuff up. It's one of the reasons why I know that I can believe the Word of God, because otherwise this wouldn't have been included at all. Why in the world would you, it doesn't need to happen. This is proof to us today that this is a big deal. The chief priests get the message from the guards, and they go, uh-oh, what are we going to do? What do you mean? He's gone. Who came and got him? No one. What do you mean, no one? Well, this angel, and we were, and then the women, and I don't know. Well, we need to talk about this. Wait here. So they go behind closed doors. They get all of the elders together. They have this big meeting. I'm sure it was a pretty lengthy discussion, although they're acting very quickly, because if this message gets out that Jesus is alive, it's big trouble for them. Big trouble for them. What are we going to do, guys? I don't know, Johnny. What do you think we should do? Well, Steve, let's pay him off. It's worked before. Okay. So here they do. They come back. They say, guys, here's what's going to happen. We're going to give you a lot of money to be quiet about this. And if anybody asks you, this is the message that you need to tell them. His disciples came and stole him. Can you do that, Steve? Yeah. Can you do that, Johnny? Sure. But what about our jobs? What happens if word gets out that we're supposed to say we fell asleep on? We could die over that. What are we supposed to do then, guys? Well, if this report gets to the governor, we'll satisfy him and keep you out of trouble. We'll pay him off too. You guys got nothing to worry about. We're just going to keep throwing money after money after money at this problem until it goes away. And eventually, people are going to stop asking. And look what Matthew says at the end. So the soldiers took the money and did as they were instructed. And this story has been widely circulated among the Jews to this very day. This story is widely circulated, thank you, among mankind to this day. You guys saw the billboard? Or you've seen the news reports? Or you've been on Facebook and seen it? Where there's other people out there that don't want you to go to church? Like Trish said earlier this morning. Go ahead, stay at home. Skip church today. Be good for goodness sake. Because they believe that someone stole the body. or that he never died in the first place. It's a whole lot harder for me to believe their version of the accounts than I think it would be for them to believe our version of the account. And we're going to explain that here in just a second. But Matthew's writing this, and the story started. Now keep in mind that these guys that wrote the Bible for us today, they didn't write it as it was happening, typically. Okay, the gospel writers, there were years between when the event happened and when they wrote this stuff down. For Matthew specifically, it was about 20 years later. And so when he's writing this down 20 years after the fact, he puts this in there and says, among the Jews to this very day, this is the story that's been going on. And it's one of the reasons why Matthew, one of the Jewish writers in the disciples, writes this. Because he's saying, guys, your plan failed. It backfired. It didn't happen. And here's what we know. We'll get to that in just a second. But Matthew's combating this, okay? So, the plan backfires. The whole design was to keep people out of the tomb. Not to keep people in the tomb from coming out of the tomb. And so the whole thing backfires. Jesus lives. He walks around, he meets with the women, he meets with the disciples, he meets with some 500 other eyewitnesses. There are people, real people, that were alive at the time that saw him before he ascended up into heaven, where he is to this day. There's no way to discount all of this stuff. It just happened. And the Romans are baffled, and the Jewish leaders are baffled, because they never really thought this could happen. So, as we've looked at Jesus and what he is and what he does and what makes him different as we lead into anticipation of his birth, here's a couple of things that I think that we can know for sure. So, his death, we can have irrefutable proof. We've got a slide for this, Randy. You got it. Slide. There you go. Well, that one's one. And then there's another. That one's better. We have irrefutable proof of Jesus' death. Why? Because it was certified by the Roman government. They're not going to certify something that they're not 100% sure of. You don't put your ring inscription into the wax and seal the tomb and guard it with Roman soldiers if the guy's alive. That's called prison. That's not called death. They weren't imprisoning Jesus. He didn't hang out at the penitentiary. He was in their grave, and they knew it. They don't send a Roman group of soldiers to protect somebody that's alive in a graveyard. So we know that Rome certified it. We know that it was validated by the Jewish leaders, because who remembered that he said he was going to come back to life in 3 days? The Jewish leaders. The disciples forgot. Or they're so overcome by grief and emotion that they didn't even think about it. They didn't consider it. But the Jewish leaders were like, ooh, we better watch out. We've got to keep this rumor from happening. So if somebody comes and steals the body, we've got to be able to prove that we've got to keep that from happening. But then if he does come back to life, that was a whole different story they didn't expect, okay? But they're validated by the Jewish leaders, because they're saying, guys, we've got to keep this body from being stolen. It's important. You don't protect an alive person. You don't have to worry about somebody stealing. That's kidnapping. And again, that's a totally different thing. They wanted him dead. He was dead. He's in the grave, and they're protecting him. They're making sure that he's not stolen as a dead person. The followers were mourning and hiding. We know that this is true because you don't grieve somebody that's alive. The women aren't going to embalm a live person. That's just weird. They're going to take care of their dead friend Jesus. The disciples are hiding, scared to death. They're not doing anything. They're afraid for their lives at this point. And people in the public saw him die. Nobody said, oh, that guy's not dead. Not quite dead yet. Any Monty Python? Right after that? Not quite dead yet. All right. It was a public death. They knew he was dead. All sectors, the Romans, the Jewish leaders, the followers, and public, just the regular old Joes, knew he was dead. There's no way to deny any of that. All of the sectors validate the fact that Jesus was dead. Jesus died. So how do we know that he rose again? There's irrefutable proof of his resurrection. We know that Jesus was God's own son because of the unique way that he was conceived. The virgin birth. The Holy Spirit and Mary create this child. It's God's son. God validates him at the baptism. He empowers him and equips him to do his job throughout his life. And he walks with them until he can't walk with them anymore. And when Jesus is on the cross, God shields his eyes from Jesus because he became sin. But God's own son can't be dead. God won't allow it. Jesus, we know that he's resurrected because he promises to overcome death. Let me tell you something. If anybody comes up to you and says, I'm going to die, but then 3 days later, I'm going to come alive today, or afterwards, and does it, they're probably worth believing in. Jesus said, I'm going to die, and I will be raised 3 days later. If anybody ever does that, it's someone worth believing in. And Jesus did. Jesus is faithful to his promise to you all. He loves you. And he's faithful. Whether we're faithful or not, Christ Jesus is faithful. And when he makes a promise, he delivers on it. Even a big one like that. We've got the eyewitness testimony to know that he's been resurrected. The women cling to him when they see him. The disciples they kind of doubt at first until they actually see him face to face, and then they're completely convinced. And 500 witnesses, it says, saw Jesus after his death. But I think some of the things that are the coolest things to consider about irrefutable proof of his resurrection is the change in the disciples. These normal everyday Joes, fishermen, most of them, tax collectors. Some of the women that followed him had really seedy reputations. Just normal everyday people. But yet, after Christ comes back alive, these people change the world. We see Peter, who was really, really good at putting his foot in his mouth. Kind of impulsive. He acts first and then thinks about it second. We see him stand before the same council that put Christ to death and deliver this incredible speech to them about all that Jesus was and the prophecy that he fulfilled. See, Peter is completely different. Boy, I was thinking, hey, I don't know, I'll set my little watch thing so that I can have a timer so that I know, and then it starts beeping like, oh, I didn't think that all the way through. Sorry. Peter's totally different. He winds up being the one that builds the church in Jerusalem. All of the disciples play these key roles in developing the church and creating this message, and they're doing exactly what Jesus said to do. Tell people, tell people, tell people. These aren't the same guys that were in hiding the day before. They're getting it done. You don't have that kind of change unless you've seen Jesus alive. This guy, a violent opponent, turned to a violent, did I say that right? Violent opponent turned to a fiery proponent. Who's that? Paul. Paul. Before his name is Paul, his name is Saul. He's a short little guy that's kind of ugly. We know that because people said, you're ugly in the Bible. They're like, this guy's ugly. And he was apparently not a very good speaker either because he got criticized for that too. But yet, Saul goes after this early church. He's killing people in the church. He has orders from the chief priests to go and stop this movement that the disciples started after Christ died and came back to life and empowered them to do it. He's going to put it to an end, and he believes he can. This little guy's holding the coats as people are murdering Stephen. And he's agreeing with what's happening. He names it and claims it and owns it in the letters that he sends to the churches later on. What in the world happened to him? How did this guy that was breathing murderous threats against the church write 2/3 of our New Testament. Who did he mean? The dead Jesus? No, he met the living Jesus. Jesus appeared to Saul on the road. He said, dude, you are jacked up. You're going the wrong way, and you're out against me right now. You don't want to be out against me, Saul. And Saul's like, okay, you may be right. And sure enough, changes his mind about who Jesus is. But it wasn't because he encountered a dead Jesus. It's because he encountered an alive Jesus. And the guy is on fire after that. He's explaining things to us that I still don't understand. Like, Paul, give me the Cliff Notes, because really, some of this stuff's deep. He spends time studying and learning and growing. This guy's not the same. He's not the same ever again. And he says, if I could be damned to hell so that my Jewish brothers and sisters could live in eternity with Jesus, I would do it. That's a big change from a guy that says, let's kill all those Christians. That doesn't happen unless you encounter a real living Jesus. Now, the other thing that I know, and that you guys know too, the irrefutable proof of Jesus' resurrection is because of the change that happened to me. Because if it wasn't for Jesus, I wouldn't be married. I'd have done my own thing a long time ago. If it wasn't for Jesus, I wouldn't know this stuff. I'd have been seeking my own. I wanted to have a Porsche by the time I was 30. That was my life ambition. It's a pretty good ambition. I mean, they're a pretty good car. Guys, if it wasn't for Jesus, I would be a mess. I would be lost. I would be hopeless. I wouldn't have anything that's important. I'd be an empty package, going through life, getting beat up, and trying to fill that box with everything that I could, trying to put whatever made me feel better inside of it, and I'd get to the end of it and have nothing to show for it because all of that stuff runs out. And when it comes to the very end day, whatever day that is for any one of us in here, man, that's empty. Because you can't take it with you, and it doesn't make a difference. I know that Jesus is alive today because he lives in me. Many of you know that Jesus is alive today because he lives in you. And you've seen the difference that he makes in your life. Are you perfect? No, I'm not either. I've fallen away from it. But every day I get up and I want to be like him. More like him. Every time I screw up, I go to him and go, dude, I blew it. I want to be like you. Why do I like that stuff? I want to like you. And I know that you don't like that stuff, so why do I like it? He's like, Graham, just hang out with me for a little bit. And maybe you're here today and you don't really know that way. And maybe today is the day to decide. It's easy. You accept it. You accept it. We can write down all of the irrefutable proof, and you can, in your mind, you can intellectually dissect it all, and you can parse it all out. You can say, I reject that based on this, and I reject this based on that. And you're trying to make it a logical decision, but I'm telling you what, it isn't about logic. It's about emotion and about willingness to submit to him. Because everything else is just a defense mechanism that we get into, because it's, when you put Jesus in the middle of your box, it can be a little bit scary. He's going to ask you to do some things you might not be comfortable with. And oftentimes we don't want anybody else controlling our lives. We want to control it ourselves. Stop. Because you don't have any control anyway. Jesus wants to be right in the middle of your life. He wants to step in and show you irrefutable proof that he is alive and he is living in you. And all you have to do is just say, all right, I'm in. Jesus, come into my life. Make me new. Create in me a new heart. Put your spirit inside of me. Help me live a life of purpose and of value and of moral. Help me be like you so that I can make you happy, because that's all that matters. And if you're here today and you need to make that decision, it's that easy. Just say, Jesus, I accept you and I want to follow you. It's that easy. It's that easy. That's easy. And you will never be the same again.